all the affairs of this world are severe and evil, and the wicked prevail. Like it says in Eitz Chaim, the 42nd portal, in the end of the 4th chapter. And this is where we left off. And as we explained, that this is the reason for this is because the energy which ultimately comes into Elam Hazeh is a energy which, we use the expression, it trickles into Elam Hazeh, which means very, very minimal energy enters into this physical world, into Olam Hazeh, and therefore it is just the end of this, the minimal, such minimal amount of chayis, of this life force and energy which comes into this world. Therefore, the world on its own doesn't demonstrate its submission to Hashem, its bittul to Hashem, and therefore it's it is kasha. It's severe. It's roim. It's evil. Which means, why would a person want to be a rasha? How can a person be a rasha in the eyes of Hashem? Because he doesn't feel he's in the eyes of Hashem. How could a person demonstrate kashiyut? How could evilness, ra, badness, evilness in the eyes of Hashem is for one reason, because they don't feel they're in front of Him, in the presence of Hashem. Is everybody in the presence of Hashem? Yes. The question is, how close? Again, we won't repeat all the different examples which we tried to use last week in order to illustrate this concept that you can be in the same domain as somebody, but in the same token very distant from the other person. We said two people, two enemies as an example. You could be in the same room in the same domain, but together with that, it could be at a certain point that one has such hatred. Again, let's use it theoretically, because it should not be. We should never hate another person, certainly not another yid. But we're talking about theoretically, when there can't be hatred of two separate people, one can't even look someone in the face. They're so distant despite they're in the same domain. Similarly, Hashem is here, but because the Elam Hazeh, this physical world, is the end game, is the end of all of Seder Ishtalshus. In other words, this whole chain of worlds and the evolving of one world after the other, another one world from the other, which is again in as we explained in the past, the whole idea of Seder Ishtalshus. This is the lowest, doesn't get lower. What does it mean lower? It doesn't mean it's there's the lowest floor, and then the second floor, third floor. It doesn't. It's not obviously higher and lower is not in the context that we understand in this physical world, or perceiving this world, physical world, higher and lower. It means something which is closer, feels the energy of God, as a higher world. Atzilus, Bria. Again, we spoke about these general four worlds. What makes us see this physical world, a tachtin, a lower and inferior world, it's a world which does not feel its own energy, or the energy which is vitalizing it, which is ultimately the godly energy. And that's what makes it an inferior world. Why is it inferior? Inferior because it doesn't stand in submission to Hashem. And the reason why it doesn't stand in submission to Hashem, because it doesn't feel the energy. And why doesn't it feel the energy? And the truth of the matter is, it goes both ways. It's like a catch-22. Because on their own, these people, which again, they are Rishaim. Rishaim is type of people which are called Rishaim. They act like Rishaim. In other words, they distance themselves from Hashem. They don't demonstrate their bittul, their submission to Hashem. And therefore, Hashem removes Himself from them. And if He removes Himself from them, so how are they still alive? How do they still function? Because just the most minimal chayis, most minimal energy, again, we elaborated on this in length last week, comes through just to keep them alive. But that's about it. So therefore, they don't feel the godly presence and energy. Therefore, and that's also why they continue to be Rishaim. And they find this world very comfortable for them, because this is a world which is Ma'elam Hazeh HaTachta, and again, She'ein Tachta L'Matamin, there's nothing inferior. And again, the reason what makes this world is inferior is because it's a world which does not demonstrate or feel not in tune to its own energy which is receiving from God. It shuns away godliness, and the godliness which is giving it life. And therefore, this is what makes it again an inferior world, a world which does not demonstrate and doesn't is not in tune and doesn't demonstrate its own source of vitality. So it seems kind of separate from Hashem, and that's why it's kasha v'ra, it's evil and the wicked dominate in this world. Even ultimately everybody's in the face of Hashem. But like we said, two people could be in the same room. There's no relationship between them. Because there is no connection, and there's no affection, and there's nothing common. Hashem is godly, the Rosh is anything else but godly. Hashem is a source of purity. The Rosh is anything else but purity. He acts in a very impure, immoral manner. That's what makes him a Rosh. So there's nothing common between him and Hashem. So he's in essence distant from Hashem, even though again there's no such a thing that a person could really go away from or Hashem really a place which you could say is devoid of Hashem. No, Hashem is there, but there's no connection between the two. Therefore, this is the Elam Hazak Hashem B'roi. This is basically where we left off in the last class. He says, Haklipa is nechlakas l'shtei madreg zulamatim. So when you're dealing with this physical world, when we're dealing now, we're skipping this this footnote. You could take the time and on your own and read it, because ultimately what the Rebbe is saying is that ultimately Hashem is ultimately everywhere, even in this physical world as well. But again, he explains the phenomenon of tzimtzum. Again, you're more than welcome to read it on your own. We're going to continue right after this Haggah, this note. So, which is, he goes on. He says, when you're dealing with a world which is evil, and when you're dealing with a world which is which is severe and evil, and the wicked dominate this world, because in this world there exists the impurity, which exists as a result of the minimal chayis, minimal energy which trickles down to this world. So he says, when you're dealing with impurity, there's two levels of impurity, and this we mentioned a few times. Alter Rebbe clearly, whether these two levels are very clear, distinct. The Rebbe compartmentalizes them. There is something which is completely impure, and something which is neutral. Neutral means that it has a bit of good. Now, the Rebbe alluded to this, or even dealt with it, in the first chapter of the Tanya. In the end of the first chapter, he says, Yesh b'hem teiv. There is a world of klipa, there's a world of impurity which still has good within it. It's not completely dark, it's not completely impure, and therefore, what do you gain that it's not completely impure? We as Yidden have the ability to transform, in other words, to expand on the light which exists within this klipa, and reveal more and more of that light which exists within the klipa, and so we can ultimately transform this klipa to kedusha. That's the concept, the phenomenon of neutral, right? You can pull front, you can go back. So it's vulnerable. In other words, it could easily fall back to the lower state of impurity. I'm just saying this generally before we continue in the text over here. It could easily fall back because it's a energy of impurity, but because it has also good within it, we have to extract or find the good and extract the good, or expound on that good, and ultimately transform this level, which is, again, it's a kind of a blurry level. It has light, it has taiv in it. Transform it to kedusha, transform it to holiness. Not only we can, we ought to. This is our mission in this world, to take the klipas nega and transform it to kedusha, as opposed to the lower level of klipa, the lower level of impurity. We must. We're told in the Torah we must stay away from. As an example, we gave this example a few times. Someone's going to say, I want to learn a Perek Tanya, I want to learn Mishnah, and I'm hungry, Mishnais, I want to learn Gemara, and I'm going to, what I have, where I have access, or the next door, they sell non-kosher food, non-kosher meat as an example, and I'm going to take that non-kosher meat, make a bracha, consume it, now I feel good, and then I'm going to sit and learn. So I'm apparently learning with the energy of that piece of meat. And in other words, I gained energy, and that gives me the ability, or at least I believe that's what gave me the ability, and on the surface it really did, to learn that piece of Gemara, to understand that piece of Gemara. If not, I would be hungry. It would be very difficult to learn. Comes Torah Semes, comes the Torah and says, that which you consumed is completely impure. There is no chance of that being elevated, because there's no light in it. Ein bahem teiv klal. There's no good in it. So if it's no good in it, it's completely pure. The moment you consumed it, it brought you down. It shoved you down. If I can use that expression, it pulled you down. It drawed you down straight into the level which it's connected to. In other words, where is that meat getting its vitality from? Where is it getting its chayis, its energy from? It's not getting it from kedusha. It's not getting it from even that neutral klipa, like we gave an example. An apple is kosher, right? And so, we have to be careful because you have to take meiser and truma. In other words, there's halachas of trumas, meiser, arla kilei keren, by fruits and vegetables, right? Between fruits and vegetables. But let's say an apple, you go to the store, buy an apple. There's nothing particularly holy about it, but it's not unholy. Where is that apple receiving the energy? It's receiving the energy from klippas nega, from this neutral klippa that I can take it and transform it, make a bracha and transform it, and elevate it to kedusha. As opposed to that non-kosher piece of meat. Why is it non-kosher? When Hashem says that animal is not kosher, He just didn't say ni mini mini mon, stop by that piece of meat. There's something intrinsic with that piece of meat which makes it non-kosher. Because Hashem says that piece of meat is receiving its energy only from the spirit of impurity, a level of impurity where it doesn't have any good. So therefore, the whole end, there's nothing within that meat that has any good. So if I eat it, it pulls me down to the level of it, of where it receives its own energy from, right? And then I try to learn something. So in essence, it's pulling my Torah down also. So there's no light, which was brought in to my neshama, to the world around me, to the environment around me. Quite on the contrary, because the energy of this learning comes from a place of shalosh klipas hatmeis, the lowest level of impurity. There's nothing good about it. It cannot be elevated. There's no taiv. There's no good. As opposed to, like we said, so the klipas nega, the Alter Rebbe is going to deal with in the beginning of chapter 7. Here, in the end of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe deals with the lower level of klipa, which is shalosh klipas hatmeis, which is called again shalosh klipas hatmeis, the 3 klipas, impure klipas. The Alter Rebbe writes v'rois legami, the completely evil and the completely no good. And we say just to note, yes.
Klipa, what does it mean?
Klipa literally means a shell. We spoke about this many times. Why is the tumma, why is the world of the state of impurity, the world of impurity, the energy of impurity compared to a shell? Is because the shell is really the no good part of any fruit, for example. Take an orange. What you're looking for the orange itself. The shell covers the orange, conceals the orange. So you take off the shell, you throw out the shell, and you eat the orange. That's the no good part. Similarly, tumma, the impurity, that's something which is no good, and many times it covers things which are good, which are good and pure and holy. That's why in Kabbalah, tumma, impurity is you use the word klipa. Klipa is, again, literally means a shell, but it's an expression for impurity. So here the Alter Rebbe, in the end of this chapter, deals with the lower level of klipa, which is again the shalosh klipas hatmeis, the third, the inferior. In other words, the level of klipa which has no good. And then in the next chapter, Perek Zayin, he deals with the neutral klipa, the neutral impurity. And again, we call it neutral because just like again neutral, you can go back and forth. So too, you can transform, elevate, and transform this klipas nega. So we just want to, when we say it receives its energy, just like you have I'd like to use just a little mashal, and I think it's good to use. It's a simple mashal, a simple example, simple parable, or it's a simple idea, which could be understood, or which rather could explain this concept of something receiving energy from klipa. The lower level of klipa, something receiving an apple, receiving energy from the klipas nega, and let's say take a pair of tefillin or a good action, a mitzvah. The energy which is allowing the mitzvah to happen, or even that pair of tefillin which became a chefza shel mitzvah, becomes an object of mitzvah, draws its energy directly from kedusha, from holiness, not only from the middle part. So I think example. What example am I using? For example, you go into let's take any factory, but let's say a bottling factory, right? Take a Coca-Cola. It's an advertisement for Coca-Cola. They're on the Tanya Shir over here, but let's say take a Coca-Cola. So there's different belts where this bottle travels. We used to take us as children to these companies. You see how the bottle travels from one kind of little conveyor belt to another. Here, the bottle has a kind of wrapper goes around it. It comes into another conveyor belt. The Coca-Cola goes into it, and then another conveyor belt. The tap goes onto it, and then there's a code that goes on. It goes on different travels and different belts, and that is where it connects to again, if it's the label or it's the liquid or whatever they're trying to put on this bottle. In the end, it comes out that product and it has everything together, right? So you see over here, it's one thing but it's in a different state. It's in a different conveyor belt, so it's receiving something else. It's on this little conveyor belt, so it's receiving the Coca-Cola. It's the cola, the liquid. It's in another conveyor belt, it's receiving the wrapper. Another conveyor belt, it's receiving the code. Similarly, there's energy coming into everything. Nothing could exist without any energy. Can a table exist without energy? Nothing. We spoke about this a few times. Last week we elaborated on this point as well. Nothing is no thing. Nothing could ever exist without any energy which is coming into it. So you look at a non-kosher animal, you say, well, if Hashem says I should not consume it, where is it receiving its energy? Isn't God creating everything? So if God's creating it, it has to have something godly to it. So there's another question: how could there be the phenomenon of complete impurity in God's world? That's a question on its own. But we're not going there. Al Rebbe will deal with it later in other chapters as well. Other chapters. In this case, something which is devoid of godliness, or you take something. This is what Hashem says not to eat, not to consume, like a non-kosher animal. Where is it receiving its energy from? If it's receiving its energy from God, why can't I consume it? The answer is no. It is on a conveyor belt right now, which is receiving its total energy from Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, from a spirit which is completely impure. Hence, because it's completely impure, you're not allowed to eat it. And again, we said before that Hashem says you're not allowed to eat something that's intrinsic with this object. The reason why you cannot eat it because it's only receiving its energy from this non-pure source. And then you say a pair of tefillin, or an action of a mitzvah. It's in a total different conveyor belt. It's receiving its energy directly from God, therefore it is holy. The energy which is giving the ability, or based on man's choice, the performance of this mitzvah, or maybe the mitzvah itself, a chefza, the object of kedusha, it's a mezuzah, pair of tefillin. It's receiving its energy from a pure, and the utmost pure, godly place and reality. Therefore, again, hence it becomes a davar shebikdusha. The apple, conversely, is receiving its energy from neither of them. It's receiving its energy from this phenomenon which is called klipas nega. It's a certain level of impurity, or it's a certain domain of impurity. It's a certain phenomenon of impurity which is called klipas nega, which its majority it's dark. In other words, it's tamei, it's impure, but it has good within it. And therefore, that apple, it's not a davar kaddish. You don't have to get up, or if the apple falls on the floor, it shouldn't, right? We have to be careful with food, but it's not. You cannot compare apple falling on the floor to a Sefer Torah falling on the floor. They're both physical. Or a pair of tefillin falling on the floor. They're both physical. But this is a davar shebikdusha because it's receiving its direct energy from God, and this is an apple which is receiving its energy from klipas nega. But in the same token, I could make a bracha on it. I could eat it l'shem shamayim. I could eat it with a godly purpose. And because it's receiving it on that conveyor belt, as we were using this example, it's receiving its energy from shalosh klipas atmeya, from klipas nega, from that neutral klipa, so it has goodness within itself. Therefore, I could make a bracha, I could elevate it, I could eat it for a godly sake and purpose, and follow through with the godly sake and purpose. And as I'm eating it in order to learn a piece of Gemara, I'm going to learn a piece of Gemara after it. So what's happening is that apple, that Lashon Al Rebbe, becomes a davar shebikdusha. Al Rebbe's Lashon is it becomes ka'ola ka'karban. It becomes like a sacrifice, which is sacrifice on the altar, on the mizbeach, in the Beis Hamikdash. The apple becomes like a sacrifice because I elevated, which I did it. I searched and seeked or extracted or dealt with the good, with the light which is in it, expanded that light, and then it was elevated similar to the pair of tefillin. It becomes davar kaddish. So I'm elevated because I continue the energy which it gave me, besides the bracha, which I made on it, which again on its own elevates it. It elevated me because with that energy I learned a piece of Gemara. So it's all Kaddish. It's kind of at that moment it removes from the neutral to the other. We're using this conveyor belt which is receiving purely from Kedusha. If I eat it without a brach, if I eat it without a godly purpose, if I not only eat it without a godly purpose, I follow through with this non-godly purpose. I was tired and I was not going to speak Lashon Hara that day. I was falling apart and someone says, come join us, gives me an apple. Even I make a bracha, but let's say worst case scenario, I don't make a bracha. What I'm doing is I'm closing the channels of taiv, of goodness, which exists with that apple, as I didn't make the bracha. And if I consume it without a godly purpose, I'm closing more channels, or more I'm concealing more of the good energy which exists within the apple. And if I follow through with Lashon Hara, because now I have energy, I could sit with you guys and I could speak Lashon Hara because I ate the apple. At that point, I completely shut off the entire all the flows of the flow of energy, of positive energy which exists in that apple. And right now it dropped. I placed it on the other conveyor belt, which is similar now to the piece of meat, to the non-kosher piece of meat, because I closed all the channels of good which exist within that apple, because again I didn't make a bracha, or even if I did, I didn't for a godly purpose, and I followed with a non-godly purpose, again with that Lashon Hara, which is again that ungodly action, which I received the energy from that apple. So I moved it over to another, to backwards. So I'm saying it because in the end of this Pedic, it'll contribute to our understanding this analogy which we just gave. So let's read it inside. The klipa is divided to two madregas, to two levels. One lower than the other. Madrega tachteina, without Rebbe, is going to begin the inferior, right? You got it? The inferior. So you're looking over here. A madrega tachteina, which is on top of the page. Exactly the words on top of the page. A madrega tachteina, which is in the English would be the lower category. Got it? Consists of the shalosh klipas atmeis legamri, the three klipas which are completely impure, completely evil, completely bad. The Eibam Tev Klal, they have no good within themselves. The chariot of Yecheskel, we know the Yecheskel, there's a whole sefer in Tanakh which is called Yecheskel. In the very beginning, he illustrates the different visions which was revealed to him, and one of them was B'merkeves, in the chariot of Yecheskel. He saw, which he deals with there, he saw a ruach sa'ara v'anan godel, a stormy wind and a big cloud, and explained in Kabbalah that was an illustration of the force of impurity, which was again the shalosh klipas atmeis, and that is. It's very forceful. We ought to challenge it, to overcome it, but that energy is what gives us brings us all our challenges in life. But even before that, in other words, it sends us the messages to, God forbid, sin. It sends us the message, it's the energy of the sin that we're able to perform, chas v'shalom, to actualize a sin, may it be an inappropriate thought, speech, or action. It's an energy. Someone thinks something inappropriate is an energy which is allowing the thought to be thought, right? That the person should again go ahead and when a person thinks about something, there's a certain energy which is flowing, which that's what's allowing it to happen, to think rather, or to speak. Someone speaks Lashon Hara. There's an energy which is allowing that speech to be spoken. And similarly, chas v'shalom, someone doesn't aveda. There's something happen. It does not happen on its own. When he eats something which is Torah says is prohibited to eat, or he does any aveda, he drives on Shabbos, or there's something there in that action. There is energy. Where's that energy coming from? The energy is coming from this ruach sa'ara non-gadol, which again in Kabbalah is called shalosh klipas atmeis. So the Rebbe, this again, he speaks about this in the end of this chapter, that this is the energy of the 365 mitzvahs leises, things which Hashem tells us not to do. But before that, he says, this is the very energy of things which are impure, non-kosher. What Torah says, do not consume, do not eat, stay away from. As we said before, it is essentially connected with that object which Hashem says stay away from. It's intrinsically connected with that object which Hashem says stay away from. So what do we see over here? That this vitalizes all this which Hashem says you're not allowed to engage with or consume. This is the Mehem, Nishbais, and Meshachas. The first of these starts with the Nefesh of the Goy, the soul of all nations which are idol worshippers. And again, we will not elaborate on this because the Rebbe spoke about it in the first chapter last week or the week before. Someone asked a question here: what happens to the nefesh of the goy? And we again revisited that whole area of the nefesh of the goy. There is a concept, the phenomenon of Chasidim Masaylam, Gentiles, which are again have their neshama comes from their nefesh is connected to klipas nega, not a full Shalosh Klipat Megas, but the Goy which the Gemara deals with, these nations which are idol worshippers, as Alter Rebbe alludes to them in the end of the first chapter, and Alter Rebbe says, Ein b'hem tev klal, they have no good within them. Even if you do find good, in other words, on the surface, and you do, we live in a world that we find many which extend goodness and kindness, but look a little deeper, you'll see there's an ulterior motive. When you say ulterior motive, which means they ultimately mean themselves, which is just the antithesis of the phenomenon of kindness. What does kind mean by definition? Kindness means that, again, just repeating this Gemara, which Alter Rebbe brought in the end of the first chapter, kindness means that I move away from myself, my comforts, my interests, and I focus on you, on another person. And in other words, the true expression of kindness, there is no ulterior motives. Kindness, by definition, means when I am kind to someone else, I put myself on the side, and I extend myself to someone else, objectively. The moment there's something subjective for me, I'm subjective and there's something in it for me, so what's the difference that it goes through the channel of me giving the other person, being kind to the other person? If ultimately there's an ulterior motive, or the motive is that I should gain, so in the end of if you look at the picture in a more complete manner, you see ultimately, who did I do kindness? With myself. It's all about me. It's not about the other person. So even though it went through, it's like, for example, somebody wants to gain something for himself. So he'll take the car, the train, or the bus in order to gain something for himself. So there was going on the bus is not something which he's ultimately, or on the surface, do you see that it's that he's doing that in order to gain in order to gain this for himself. In other words, in order for him to, or let's say they're honoring him in a certain place, so there's certain technical steps he has to take in order to receive that honor. So what's the difference if you take the bus or the car in order to come to the place where they're going to honor you, or if you're going to do a favor to another person, if ultimately the whole reason and motive which you have why you did the other person a favor is in order that you should receive the honor, it's all about you, or you should gain something because of this favor that you extended to someone else. So what's the difference if you took that step, which you don't see you're extending yourself to someone else as you're taking the bus or the car or the train? Ultimately, what is the ultimate purpose? Why did you take the bus? Because they're going to honor you in that place. Why did you extend yourself to the other person? Is because also you're going to gain. They're going to honor you, or you're going to have any other gain from it. So because the end game is the same, you're reaching the same place, which is yourself, your honor, right? Your self-aggrandizement. So what's the difference if it's taking a bus or helping someone else? Because it's ultimately about you. So the Gemara says if you find the Gentile extending himself to another person, you should know like a Mayab, and he's doing it ultimately for himself. So it's all about himself. So it's not true kindness. Again, kindness by definition means I'm leaving myself. And I'm removing myself on the side completely. And I'm objectively doing another person a favor. So again, this is the Gemara which Alter Rebbe elaborates in the end of the first chapter. We do say there are exclusion among Gentiles, and again, we know that in our history in the past, we spoke about the last century, certain examples which definitely defy this whole explanation. In other words, it's not aligned with this explanation, which means with the way the Gemara explains about the God, because there was non-Jews which demonstrate enormous amount of kindness objectively just for the sake of helping other people and helping Jews. So again, this is in brief, if you could say, call it in brief at this time, to say the difference between this guy, this Gentile, and the other. But you say the classic Oiv de Gelulim, the nations which commit idolatry, they are worship idolers. They worship idols. The idol worshippers, they receive their energy because Ein Bahem Tev Klal, because there's no good on the surface or even within. Where are they receiving their energy from? From the Shalosh Klipsat Meis, which has no Tev, which has no good. And the same Divikim Gufam, which gives life to their bodies. And similarly, as we said before, when Hashem says that you're not allowed eating that animal, you're not allowed eating the meat of that animal, is because that meat of that animal is receiving the energy of Shalosh Klipsat Meis. That's why it's not kosher. That is the reason why Hashem says do not consume that, because it's receiving right now. It's on the plate, or that animal on its own, or it's on the plate, it's receiving its energy from Shalosh Klipsat Meis. Do not eat that. Vasur machil, anything which is again called balechayim, which are impure, any animal which is impure, vasur machil, which is prohibited to eat, which Torah prohibits to eat. And similarly, again, here the Alter Rebbe goes, if you notice, he goes from the medaber, the human being, down to the animal, and then he goes the step lower, which is the vegetation. We know everything is divided, the world is divided into the four categories: domim, the inanimate, and then the tzomeach, this which grows, which is basically vegetation, trees, vegetables, etc. And then you have the animal, which again not only grows, but they maneuver from one place, move from one place to the other. You see more life in them. And then you have the human being, which is called the medaber. He has the gift of speech. So the Rebbe says again, when you're dealing with Shalosh Klipsat Meis, it has so much energy that it's giving chayas to all the idol worshippers, and it's giving chayas to all the animals which Torah said is prohibited to eat. And it's giving chayas, it gives the life and energy with something to Hashem says in the Torah. If the world of vegetation don't eat, for example, the Rebbe says, Orlo Klei HaKerem. And here you see again this idea which we mentioned before about the conveyor belt. Look how clear it is. Something which is, and this is primarily in Eretz Yisrael, an apple tree. The first 3 years you're not allowed eating. When you plant an apple tree, the first 3 years Hashem says that apple you're not allowed eating. The moment you cross into the 4th year, that apple you're allowed to eat. And not only that, the 4th year it's a mitzvah to take it to Yerushalayim and consume it, and so on. The apple gains a sense of kedusha as well, holiness. You're dealing with a split second essentially, from the 3rd year to the 4th year. What happened was the first 3 years it was on this conveyor belt, which is receiving its energy only from Shalosh Klipsat Meis, and therefore we ought to stay away from it because it's intrinsically no good. The moment the 4th year comes in, Hashem says, I just flipped it to the other side, and maybe even to the Tzaddik Kedusha, because it's Ma'aseh Sheni. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim, it carries Kedusha. It's the same apple. It's the same exact apple. Or it's the same tree which is producing. It could be, because it's the 3rd, in other words, the fruit which come off the tree, the 3rd is maybe not the same fruit come off the tree of the 4th, but it's the same tree. So what's happening over here? The tree, the same tree, the first 3 years Hashem says it, because Hashem says you're not allowed to eat. The 4th year becomes Ma'aseh Sheni. The 5th year you're still allowed to eat it with the bracha. Right? So what's happening is because the energy which is coming into these apples, those first 3 years, come from Shalosh Klipsat Meis. Let's read it inside. Vikim Gufam, sorry, this is again, Alter Rebbe goes onto the soul of the animal and the body of the animal, similar to what Alter Rebbe writes, the soul of the idol worshipper and the body of the idol worshipper, the soul of the animal and the body of the animal. And then he goes on Vikim Chayis and the energy. And what brings into existence kol machalas asuris, everything which is prohibited, me'atzemeach, again from the world of vegetation. Kimei orlo v'klei hakerem, orlo again, which this is the halach of orlo, is the first 3 years of the tree which were prohibited to eat. Why are you prohibited to eat the apple? What's wrong with that apple? The answer, as Torah says, the first 3 years not allowed eating it. The reason, because Hashem is telling you that apple right now is receiving its energy from Shalosh Klipsat Meis. In other words, when Hashem says you're not allowed eating arla, in other words, Hashem is telling you that that's receiving its energy from Shalosh Klipsat Meis. Hence, stay away from it. And similarly to Klei HaKerem. Klei HaKerem is again when you mix the seed or the actual the vine fruit and the wheat, and eventually it grows together. It's called Kiloi HaKerem. Hashem says you're not allowed eating it. when these two seeds or these two fruit come together, are combined and grows a tree from that, Hashem is telling you don't eat it. When Hashem says don't eat that Kli HaKerem, in other words, Hashem is telling you that is right now receiving from this, we call it the conveyor belt, which is receiving from Shalosh Klipsat Meiz, the lowest level of impurity. How can you eat it? How can you think you can make a bracha on it? There is no toiv, there's no goodness, there's no light.
It's more than that. You can't, from both of them, you can have no benefit at all. That's just not eating.
Oh, correct. It's not even not eating, but not in benefit. Which means you see how dark it is. You see how kedusha-less it is. How it's so distant from holiness, and it's so in go, or its soul energy comes from the world of tumah. Thank you. Excellent. Like it says in the Eitz Chaim, the 49th portal. Again, as he divided his sefer into portals, the 6th chapter. Here the Alter Rebbe adds, and with this we conclude the chapter. This as well is brings into existence and the life energy of all the action, speech, and thought of the 365 Leisesa and its branches, like it says in the end of the end of the Perikei, the end of the 5th chapter there in Eitz Chaim. And what Alter Rebbe is saying so clearly, a person walks in the street, he thinks his mind is thinking words of Torah, or he's strategizing how to do someone a favor. There is energy in that thought. There's enormous energy in that thought. Where is that energy coming from? It's coming from the world of Kedusha, the world of purity. It's coming from God. The moment Chas v'Shalom Rachman Litzlan, something catches his eye, and he invests, he allows his thoughts to invest in this inappropriate manner. In other words, we know that in thought it also plays a role in Yiddishkeit. Even in thought, we're going to start from thought. In Hashem, there's certain ideas Hashem says we're prohibited to entertain our mind with. So when something catches our thoughts and we allow the thoughts to go on, in other words, the fact that it came to be, in other words, that I was tested with such a thought, that's realistic, because we're in a world, like we said before, it's a world which the reality and the ongoings of this world is evil and bad, because again it's also Shoshim, and therefore something within this world can test you and can catch your eye and your thought and test you again, because Hashem is ultimately testing us, but we are supposed to deviate our minds and thoughts from this which Hashem says it's prohibited to entertain our mind with. But what if someone lets his mind go? He knows that it's inappropriate. He realizes it's inappropriate, but he lets his mind go. Shall he know, as the Alter Rebbe says, at that moment that you stop thinking that machshava tova, that good thought, or that godly thought, or that Torah thought, which is ultimately a godly thought, at that moment your machshava, the energy coming into your thought, was coming from the world of purity, the world of Kedusha, from God Himself. The moment you change your thoughts, you took your machshava and put it from this conveyor belt into the other conveyor belt. Right now, the energy which is coming into your thoughts, which is allowing that thought process to maneuver, in other words, the energy which exists in that thought process is right now coming from Shalosh Klipsat Meiz. So we have to understand, there's enormous, when we decide to change our thought from Chas v'Shalom, from an appropriate thought, or a godly thought, a Torah thought, to something which is inappropriate, it's not just something, okay, now I'm thinking this, something I'm thinking, you took the machshava, the koach machshava, the energy of thought that Hashem gifted you, you pulled it away from the world of purity and you put it on the other conveyor. But right now, those thoughts, which is, again, we understand, when someone thinks something, there's energy which is coming in, because if there wasn't energy, you would not be able to think. The fact that you're thinking, there's energy which is coming through. But where is the energy coming through right now? The energy is coming from Shalosh Klipsat Meiz, the same energy which gives life to that non-kosher animal, or something which Torah says stay away from, is right now entering into your thought. Similarly, when, again, that's machshava, similarly when someone speaks words of Torah, the words when he speaks. We don't have to explain how much energy exists within speech. There's enormous energy which exists because it's a koach of a nefesh. And see, again, we see it evidently. There's energy which exists within speech. Where's the energy coming from? So as long as I speak words of Torah, or speak a word of kindness to another person, anything which is associated with Torah and mitzvahs, that energy is right now the speech, the koach of speech of my speaking is on the conveyor belt, which is receiving energy from kedusha, from holiness, from godliness. The moment I change my speech and I start speaking lashon hara, again, there's energy in that lashon hara. If there wasn't energy, I wouldn't be able to speak. There's energy in that lashon hara. Where's the energy coming from? It's coming from the shalosh chibsat meis, because it's something which Hashem says, do not speak. And I go ahead and speak that lashon hara. It may be lashon hara, rechilus, anything which Hashem says no, which is again becomes Hashem says no on something. It's intrinsically impure. It's not just Hashem stopped by a certain action. When Hashem says no, Hashem is telling you, in other words, that this energy, engaging in this, you connect yourself to Shalosh Kibsat Meis, or more so, the Aveda itself is Shalosh Kibsat Meis, the energy of the Aveda is Shalosh Kibsat Meis. So when I start speaking Lashon Hara, the energy, which of my speech, again, it's evident there's energy, there's a ball of energy, every word a person says, right now it's coming from Shalosh Kibsat Meis. And similarly, when you're dealing with action, it's the same thing. As long as I'm putting on tefillin as an example, that action, there's so much energy in that action that's coming from Kedusha, from the world of Kedusha. World of Torah, world of Elokus, of godliness. The moment I do something with my hands, something that Hashem says not to do, I shifted my hands from that area of Kedusha to an area of Shalosh Kibsat Meis. So my action, the again, action for sure carries energy. It was more evident. Everything carries energy. Thoughts carry energy. Speech carry energy. But what is more evident, that action carry energy is even more evident. There's something happening. Right now, the energy which is flowing into my hands, which is doing something wrong, that energy is coming to Shalosh Kibsat Meis. And here the Alter Rebbe just adds one word, not only the Leises of the 365 Leises, but even Van Fein, their branches. You open up a Shulchan Aruch, makes one mitzvah, or one Aveda, one Leises, which Torah deals with it and expands on it, and expounds on and he says, and there's so many details in Halacha which evolve from this one mitzvah leisus. So every detail, if I engage with that detail, what may be machshava, dibur ma'asav, by the thought, speech, and action, at that moment I shifted again the thought, speech, and action with something which is or neutral, which is klipas nega, which again Alter Rebbe will deal with in the beginning of the chapter 7, or even from kedusha. If I was involved prior, in the second before, in a godly thought and godly speech and godly action, and then I shifted with my own freedom of choice into something which is ungodly, it's not just something that's just randomly happening. Shall we know right now you flipped yourself onto a new conveyor belt, which is unfortunately receiving from the complete world, rather, of impurity, Shalosh Kibsat Meis, she'ein b'hem tov klal, there's no good at all. And therefore, this gives again another extra incentive in koach, which we have to understand the responsibility we have. When Hashem says leisus, He gives us a leisus and tells us stay away from this, that, and the other. It's not just we're transgressing, we're rebelling against Hashem, which is also true, and we have to be careful because we're dealing with Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of all kings. We're dealing with Hashem, God Himself, which gave us a Torah, and we have to obey Hashem. But what Alter Rebbe is conveying to us in the end of this chapter, that we could see what is happening beneath the surface. Not only am I rebelling in Hashem, I completely shifted myself. I'm on a conveyor belt, Rachmana litzlan, the energy of my thoughts, my speech and action is receiving from the world of impurity. And what level of world impurity? Not the neutral level, the Shalosh Kibsat, the Klipas Noga, but the Shalosh Kibsat Meis. Who wants to receive? Who wants to be on that conveyor belt? Practically nobody. In our conscious mind, that was something which we would never want to be on and receive our chayas from there. Who with a normal mind will want? Nobody. So therefore, again, it gives us the extra incentive over here, the koach, to understand what happens when a person engages with maybe thought, speech, and action, to make sure always be on the side of Kedusha.
And we talk about 3 elements of negativity here as well. But he also gives 3 examples, right? Examples from the Medaber, from the nations. And then he gives from the animals.
Right.
And then he gives from plant life.
Right.
The one he gives from the nations, in some ways, is the smallest caution we have. Know what the motivation is. know their motivation is for themselves.
Right.
It doesn't say you can't do business with them, you can't have commerce, whatever. Right? Know where they're coming from. That's what.
Interesting. Go ahead. Yeah, very interesting.
And the second one, he doesn't bring Basar B'Chala. He brings things that you shouldn't eat, but you can sell. You can profit from. The things you can profit from, they're forbidden to eat. Right? And the last one, which he brings from the inanimate objects, you can't benefit from in any way.
Or the plant life objects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plant.
Right.
Plant.
Right. Plant life is still animate. Yeah.
He said in this, right? You can't eat. You shouldn't associate with, and you can't
even have a note from. It's very interesting you're saying. I would just want to say one correction. The not Balchaim and Atmei Masurim Bachila, if I recall right, that there's something that
you can sell chazer.
You're not allowed. You're not allowed making a business out of it. In other words, it's still correct what you're saying. If that.
But if he was bringing it here, he would bring Basar B'Chala. Basar B'Chala and Orla are in the same place.
Basar B'Chala also.
Right.
Right. Interesting. Interesting that you're saying that. It's interesting because, but I'll just say the halacha of Balchaim Atmeim, the certain Balchaim Atmeim, that let's say you have a lot of it, for example, and you go over to one guy and you say, I don't have nothing to do with it. I would like to sell it to you. I mean that's permitted, and I got to check it up in halacha. But to establish a business. You can't, but you get benefit from it. It's very interesting you're saying you can't benefit from it. The last one, very interesting in pointing this out.
Examples given here, right? Because you could have brought other examples of forbidden things.
Right.
Two examples of the
which is Asr B'Hano, which is
No Hano.
Very well said. Very well said. Very well said. You brought
the relationship between the other three.
Yeah. You brought an interesting. Even there's nothing. I mean, the three levels and categories is very. You brought a very interesting point to light. And you see that precision over here in bringing dafka this. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. One thing I would like to just point out also when it comes to. This is something technical because he said when it comes to the Gentile, or he speaks about the animals which are prohibited to eat. He divides. He said their soul and their body. When it comes to the plant, the world of plants, he doesn't say about soul and body. He just says kol machalas asuris. You see, when it comes to the gilulim, he says nefashis sev the kolum sev the gilulim v'kim gufam. Nefashis kol balachayim atmeim basurim b'chila v'kim gufam. And then he goes v'kim chayis kol machalas asuris. The simple answer to this is because where do you see the nefesh, the soul of something? Everything has to some degree a soul, but you start seeing it more in the animal, especially in the human being.
We say it's in the blood.
What?
We hold it.
Right, nefesh b'damhi. The plant world doesn't have blood. Right, the plant world doesn't have blood. That's also very, very. You're great. You belong here, all from beginning, not in the middle.
The plants don't have it.
Right, plants don't have it. I'd say also on the surface. Where do you see something which you could say distinctively, this is the body of it, this is the soul of it? It really begins in the world of animal. As opposed to the world of the plants, you don't see so much, you can't really distinguish and say this is the soul and this is the body. It's something which grows and has energy and it is, you could define it, but the not so much not with so much with the definition or the distinction with body and soul. I think that's a simple answer, but it's interesting you're saying the nefesh habasa b'damhi, the pasuk says that the soul is in the blood and doesn't have blood. Very well, very good, very well said. Yeshikach. Okay, good evening.